If I missed you the first time around, I'm Gene. I'm part of the team here. This is Katlyn. Katlyn Gipson. She is on our team as well. She is our manager of communication. And as such, you hear from her a lot, whether you know it or not. If you're on our email list or text list, you hear from her. She's the person that puts that all together. This morning, we are continuing, and if you missed the storyline series, I think it was in August or September, Katlyn had a message that she was bringing during that series, and she got sick that particular weekend, and so that didn't happen, and so we postponed it until today, November 10th. And I told her this morning that I think that there's a design in all of this, because sometimes that elongation of time that exists, things continue to stir in us. And I think her message to us this morning, God's message through her, has been refined over the last number of weeks. And so I'm very excited for you to hear what God's put on our heart. What you need to know is that I have known Katlyn since she was a baby, and never did I think or consider that she might be on my staff team, but it is a privilege to have her on the staff team. And so I know all the dirty little secrets about Katlyn, which I'm not gonna share with you, but I want you to know that she is incredibly courageous, that she has battled to be here this morning, and she's fighting a good fight. And so, Katlyn, we are all for you, every one of us. I promise you that everyone here will lean in, they'll pay attention, they won't fall asleep, and they will encourage you as we go along. So, would you stretch your hands out towards Katlyn, and we'll pray for her. Father, in the name of Jesus, we come to you this morning because we need you. We need your presence. We want to be people of the Jesus way, and that means that we are not on this journey alone, but we are with each other and with you. And so as we hear your word this morning from Katlyn, would you impart to her whatever it is that she may still need? You are the giver of good gifts, and you've given her and are giving her exactly what she needs for the time ahead. Would you bless the word as it is spoken, as it is preached, and may our lives be lives that are transformed because of being in your presence. Bless her as she speaks to us now. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thanks, Gene. Well, good morning, everyone. As Gene said, my name is Katlyn, and I am really excited to be here with you this morning. So a little about me. My husband and Zach, he's on the screen, there he is. We've attended here for about 4 years, and we really feel like we've found a home. And as Gene said, I'm so honored to be a part of the team here. I didn't ever really think it would happen either, but I'm so glad that it did. And so, yeah, that's a little bit more about me. But about the time we started attending here, we added a little energetic little cockapoo named Moose to our family. And funny enough, we got this dog, and I thought, I bet that having a dog is gonna help with my anxiety. But actually, he thought that we could help him with his. So, I mean, you know, for now, he is the baby of the house, but we are looking forward to adding a son to our family in March. So I'm really excited for that, yeah. I grew up in a really awesome family. To this day, we have a really close relationship, and sometimes we look at each other and we're like, I think this is kind of unique. I don't think everyone has this, and so I'm really grateful for that. I am the youngest of 3 siblings. And if you are the youngest, you know why I said it like that. But I have a sister, Emily, and a brother, Ryan, who both attend here. And being the youngest, I mean, it made for some interesting stories, okay? And usually those stories included me being told what to do, or tricked into eating my ice cream the fastest, or like, hey, you can come into our rooms and pick a special treat, but it has to be from the trash can. Like, okay, yeah, that sounds awesome. And I did it. There are a few stories that always stick out to me, but one of my favorites is that one day when I was about 3 years old, I was, minding my own business as the youngest children do, right? And my sister approached me. She was 8 at the time. And she asked me a simple question. She said, "Do you want to become a Christian?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Yes, you do. Let's go find Mom." So it wasn't all bad being told what to do, I guess. But we had a really fun childhood, and so fun, in fact, that one summer, my parents, they bought us a go-kart on which the brakes only worked sometimes. But they say they didn't know that at the time, so we just have to trust them with that. One day, I'd been watching my siblings ride this thing around the yard, and I thought, I can do this. And so I jumped in, and my toes, barely reached. I was little, okay? My toes barely reached to the brake pedal, but I thought, it will be no problem. So off I went. I did a lap around the house, and then things started kind of go a bit sideways. And I flew through the yard, and as I was headed straight for our barn, okay? And I realized, I go to push the brake, and I realize I cannot reach. I cannot push the brake hard enough. I am going to run into the barn. So I had to make a decision. And in that moment, what I decided was to make a sharp left turn, and I headed for the cornfields that lined the back of our house. And I still couldn't reach when I got there, and so I just mowed over the first 3 rows of corn, and then we came to a stop, me and the go-kart. And then, so we got me dug out. My parents came and got me out, whatever. But my mom, she decided, I am gonna help her be successful on this go-kart. And somewhere in the process of getting me out, I guess I had forgotten to mention, I didn't stop because I couldn't reach. Because she thought I just didn't know how. So she puts me back on the go-kart, and she says, okay, you're just gonna drive from here to here, and then I want you to stop. You got that? Got it. It's yeah, I can do this. And so I do that. I drive from there to there. I still couldn't reach the brake. So I did not stop. And now it was my mom's turn to make a decision. The decision that she made was to lunge and grab onto the back of the golf cart. There was a bar back there, okay? And I don't know for sure what it looked like from her perspective, but I think it was something like, until finally I remembered that there was a kill switch on the steering wheel, and I pressed it, and we all came to a stop. I felt so bad. I had dragged my mom behind the go-kart. But I don't tell you that this morning because I ever had a successful ride on the go-kart. I don't think I ever rode it after that day, which seems wise, if I'm being honest. But I tell you that story because what I remember when I look back on that is how out of control I felt. And as the go-kart zoomed along, my toes they couldn't reach. And it was a really scary feeling, but I think a feeling of a lack of control is something that many of us experience, if we're really honest with ourselves. And the truth is that we all respond differently to that. Sometimes it's anger, manipulation, or numbing, whatever it may be. For me, my response to feeling out of control has always been anxiety. And so today, that's where the story begins. Not with that day on the go-kart, but with a feeling of being out of control and anxious. And I would imagine that even though our stories look different, there will be parts of my story that you'll be able to identify with. Maybe you even know what it feels like when life circumstances feel so impossible that we think maybe we can control it better than God can, because I know I have been there often. And whatever your story is, I just want you to know that I'm acutely aware of how much pain some of you have walked through, how much pain some of you might be walking through right now. And I just want you to know that I honor that today. And I hope that as we journey together through the scriptures and through what God has taught me, that you would just be met on the way by Jesus. That's really my heart. That's my desire. So yeah, let's dive in. So anxiety has been a companion for much of my life, as I said, and while I could never point to a concrete beginning, I could always trace it back to that feeling of being out of control. So while it's been a pretty constant part of my story, I would say it doesn't often interrupt my life. In fact, it usually comes across as worry, which is much more manageable, honestly. But there have been a few times in my life where it's been a bit more bothersome and intense. And as I would experience these stronger bouts of anxiety, I would always, I always found solutions. It's counseling, medication, any other measure of things. The symptoms would lessen, I would go on my way. But 5 years ago, in the fall of 2019, the anxiety was the worst it's ever been. Zach and I had just gotten married. I was trying to settle into my new role as a wife and what all that meant. And to add to it, nothing that I was doing before was working now. I was in counseling, I was taking medicine, I was doing all the things, all the Christian things, tried praying it away, giving it to God, all the things, okay? And I began to experience these panic attacks that soon became a regular part of my life. And they got really intense, and I would wake in the night, and within 30 seconds, my body would just enter into a panic. I was I didn't even have time to decide, do I want to panic or not? Because the answer would have been no. But sometimes I would be awake for hours at a time, and it would happen multiple nights a week. And if I experienced panic during the day, it would interrupt my ability to be at work, to be with family and friends, to do a lot of the things I had really enjoyed. I really spent a lot of time paralyzed by fear. And so in a lot of ways, I felt like I was living a life that wasn't familiar to me at all. I hadn't experienced this before, and I had no idea what to do with it. And this continued for about a year. And I remember one day I was getting ready to leave the house, and this specific song came on, and the chorus read like this. It says, "You get the glory from this. No matter what I have to go through in this world, as long as you get the glory from it." And as I listened, tears just began to fall, and I knew that that needed to be my prayer. So I began to pray, God, I will endure this if I have to, but I just really need you to use it for your glory. I did get a little bossy with him there. I did. But I wonder if you've ever had a moment where you've found yourselves clenching your fists, right? Maybe it's ooh, during a game, or you're excited, or you're angry, or whatever it is. But that day, I did that. I prayed that prayer, clenching my fists. And for me, that was a sign of something I was doing reluctantly, something that I was just trying to muster my way through. And I wanted so badly for the Lord to come. How many times did I say, God, I know you can heal me in a moment. I know you can. But as I prayed that prayer that day, it felt incredibly scary to admit that maybe he wouldn't. Maybe that wasn't the plan for healing that he had for me. And I knew that if he didn't, that didn't change his goodness. But about a year after the panic attacks began, I was desperate, as you can imagine. Physically and mentally, I didn't feel well. I knew that I needed to try new things, if I wanted to start healing. So I began to heal my body, my mind, my spirit. And as I began this process, I had a sense from the Lord that this would be the deepest work I would do in regards to anxiety, that I would explore places that needed healing that hadn't ever explored before. And so I found a Christian acupuncturist. Now, remember, I said I was desperate, y'all, okay? But I was like skeptical. I was like, there's no way this is gonna work. But I started going to these acupuncture appointments, and I was amazed to find that after a few visits, the panic attacks just stopped. It was like that my body just learned like, oh, I don't have to respond like that. And it was a huge gift. But I knew that the underlying anxiety was still there and that I needed to heal that if I ever wanted to be truly free from that. And so I had started seeing a counselor earlier in the year, and I continued to attend those appointments. And to be honest with you, I still do, and I love it. And she's like, she can't really be my friend because she's my counselor, but we have a great time together, okay? And so I continued to take the medicine that I had started taking earlier that year, and I was intentional to incorporate scripture, and all of these things worked together, and little by little, over the next couple of years, certainly not overnight, the anxiety began to ease. And in many ways, like I said, I'm still walking it out. I want you guys to know that this morning. I am still walking it out, but my clenched fists slowly started to relax, and my prayer changed. And I began to pray, even if I carry this anxiety with me for the rest of my life, I will continue to learn how to trust you and give you the glory through it. And on my best days, I could even pray, even if the thing that I fear the most happens to me, I trust that you'll heal me through it. So this prayer reminds me of one of my favorite passages of scripture in Daniel 3. So you may be familiar with it, maybe not. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were 3 Jewish men. They were living in Babylon under the rule of King Nebuchadnezzar. And one day, Nebuchadnezzar builds this golden statue. It's 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide. And he orders everyone to bow down and worship it. And he says, if you don't, I'm going to throw you in the furnace. Pretty clear. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are Jewish. And so they refuse to worship the idol that he has set up. And this doesn't sit well with Nebuchadnezzar, as you might imagine. And so it'll be on the slide behind me, but in chapter 3, verses 15 to 18 of Daniel, it says, I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace, and then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve or worship the gold statue you have set up. And I absolutely love their response in verse 18 when they say, even if he doesn't. The 3 men knew that God was able. They trusted in his power, but they were willing to say, even if not. Even if was their natural response. And I have to admit that that's because it wasn't the first time they had positioned their hearts to be faithful in the midst of a circumstance that was really hard. And their worship of the Father, it wasn't conditional on getting what they wanted or what they were asking for. It wasn't based on how he responded to them in that moment. It was based on what they knew to be true of him, which was that he was faithful and worthy of their praise no matter what. Daniel 3 goes on to say that Nebuchadnezzar was so furious, his face became distorted with rage. He heats the furnace 7 times hotter than normal, finds the 3 men, and throws them in there. And then in verse 24, he has a realization. But suddenly, Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace?" "Yes, your majesty, we certainly did," they replied. "Look," Nebuchadnezzar shouted, "I see 4 men unbound, walking around in the fire, unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god." I love this so much. I love it because Nebuchadnezzar, who didn't serve or worship God, recognized God's angel accompanying the 3 men. And some people even think that the 4th man in there was Jesus. And I think this is such a beautiful illustration of how Jesus joins us in the fire. When life feels impossible, he's there. He's our companion. And I saw a quote this week from Emily P. Freeman, and it says it this way: "The heartbeat of Christian hope is not that God is in control, but that God is in companionship with us." Because it is true that God is in control, and I am so glad. So glad. But sometimes what I think I need to know most is that he's joining me. That no matter what happens, I won't be alone. And I think that in order to recognize that we have a companion, we have to give up the need to do it all on our own. The need to control our circumstances. At least that's what I found to be true for me. So here we fast forward my story a bit, and we find ourselves in August of 2023. Last fall, my practice of learning to say "even if" was put to the test. In mid-August of last year, we learned that we were expecting our first baby. We had been trying for a few months, and we were overjoyed. And then just a few days later, literally 3 days, my husband received a very unexpected job offer. And he'd been on the hunt for something new for a while, but we just didn't think it would come like this. And I was really reluctant, as I knew that this job would require a really big life change. It includes lots of travel. And I just wasn't sure that was something we were ready for, especially when I thought about, how am I gonna have a baby with this? But as we prayed and we pondered, we both felt like it was the right decision. It was kind of one of those, if I don't, I think I'll always wonder type of things. And so he accepted the job, and we moved forward with hope for all that the future held. We were really excited. And then just about 10 days later, right before Zach was set to start his new job, we lost that first baby. The next few weeks went by in a blur, and I spent a lot of time in and out of doctors' offices. There were a lot of tears, a lot of meals and gifts from family and friends, and the first of many work trips for Zach. And then just as life began to feel a bit normal again, I encountered an incredibly difficult situation at the job where I had worked full-time for 3.5 years. As Zach and I sought counsel, we both felt that the best decision was for me to leave that job. And so by this time, it was, October of 2023, last year, it was just about 6 weeks after we had learned I was expecting. I was living a life that looked nothing like I thought it might. I was newly 30. I was unemployed. I was grieving the loss of a baby and a dream. And I was sending my husband out the door on another work trip. Everything that had taken place felt so far out of my control. And I've heard it said that sometimes life is like a series of moves from one room to the next. Maybe you spend a while in one room, but as you leave, you enter a hallway before you enter into the next room. And sometimes you're in that hallway for a short time, but other times you're in that hallway for what feels like forever. The hallway has often been described as liminal space. The word liminal, by definition, means occupying a position at or on both sides of a boundary or threshold. When you're in liminal space, you have left something that was, and you're preparing to enter into something that will be. Things aren't as they were, and they're not as they're going to be. And sometimes this space is really uncomfortable. It feels a lot like suffering. I imagine that even though our stories are different, many of you can identify what it feels like to be in this time of waiting. A year ago at this time, I was in a hallway. By the fall of 2023, I had left lots of rooms. And as I stood in the hallway, I had to decide, am I going to clench my fists and beg God to let me into the next room on my timing? Or will I learn to trust him as I wait and seek abundance there? Will I be angry with God? Or will I choose to trust his goodness, even if life didn't go the way I thought it would? Will I allow Jesus to be my companion in the pain and the heartache? Will I choose to remember that no matter what comes my way, I will never be without him? Jeremiah 29 talks a bit about this. A bunch of believers had been taken from Jerusalem into exile in Babylon. And so Jeremiah writes a letter to these believers in exile, and these are God's instructions that he shares with them. It says, build houses and settle down, plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters, find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there, do not decrease. Also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. The exiles had a choice. They found themselves in liminal space. They weren't in Jerusalem anymore, but Babylon wasn't their final destination. They could despair. They could sit and wait for God to bring them out of exile. But the reality was, he had more for them there. Even though it was never what they would have chosen for themselves, he wanted to meet them there. Last fall, as I waited for life to feel a bit normal again, I had spent a lot of time considering the what ifs, the possible despair that could have been my reality. What if I don't ever have a baby? What if I never adjust to this new way of life with Zach's job? What if I never find work that I enjoy again? So I'm glad that as time went on, I found work that I enjoy here. And I am adjusting to this new way of life with Zach's job. But in that time of waiting, God highlighted this passage in Jeremiah to me, and I realized that in my wait for a child, I hadn't really been waiting well. As I waited for him to answer that prayer, I was sitting in the hallway with my fists were clenched. I was asking him to do it on my time. I was angry. I was impatient. I was tired of it. I was tired of waiting. But he showed me that whether he answered my prayer in the way I wanted him to or not, he had good things for me in the waiting. Even if more heartbreak happened, I would always have a companion with Jesus. So to fully embrace that space I found myself in, I had to change my focus from what if to even if. So I began to pray, or began to tell myself as I waited for a child, even if it's just Zach and I for the rest of our lives, we will live a really good life. As I adjusted to Zach's new schedule of work and travel, I would often say, and I still do say, even if it feels impossible right now, there will be a day when it feels easier. And as I adjusted to not working for the first time in 15 years, I had to extend myself grace and say, even if my purpose now is different than what it's always been, God still has incredible plans for me. So let me be clear about something. I don't always do a good job of saying even if. This is so hard for me. And sometimes I have a hard time believing that God will see me through things. Because yes, he is in control. That's true. But that doesn't always give me warm fuzzies. I just got to be honest with you. I think it's a natural human response, or at least it has been for me, to try and take the place of God, to control and reign over my situation. But in my experience, it's never been fruitful. And for me, these fruitless attempts come down to mistrusting God. And I found that in order to make a move to trust, I have to remember that no matter where I find myself, I have to go back and remember I will never be without my companion, who's Jesus. And I would suspect that on some level, we're kind of somewhere on that spectrum, all of us. Complete mistrust, developing trust, or trusting completely. And so I just wonder where you find yourself today. When I'm having trouble making a move toward trust, I found a few truths that comfort me along the way. The first one is that I have a shepherd leading me. In the last year, I have spent a lot of days reading and reflecting on Psalm 23. Sometimes when I would open my Bible, it was just like the only thing I could read. And I won't read the whole thing, but I wanted to highlight the first 2 verses. The Lord is my shepherd. I have all that I need. He lets me rest in green meadows. He leads me beside peaceful streams. Look at the glass. It illustrates this beautifully. And I love it so much because I learned that it's a shepherding fact that sheep only drink from water that's still. And so the shepherd, who I see as God, knows what we need, and he gives it to us. He knows how to comfort us. The second thing I remind myself is that God doesn't leave me without a reason to hope. In John 16:33, Jesus says to his disciples, I have told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart, because I have overcome the world. I don't believe that God ordered my suffering, but I do believe that he promises to walk with me through it. The third thing I remind myself of is that he is kind enough to use my response for his glory. So if we jump back to Daniel chapter 3, verse 28, so Nebuchadnezzar, he saw the faithfulness of these 3 men and the God that they served, and then he changes his tune. Verse 28 says, Then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's command and were willing to die rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. And we don't know for sure, but it's possible that their response changed the trajectory of a whole nation. And the fourth thing I remind myself is that there is provision even in the heartbreak. In Habakkuk 3:17-19, it says that even though the fig trees have no blossoms and there are no grapes on the vine, even though the olive crop fails and the fields lie empty and barren, even though the flocks die in the fields and the cattle barns are empty, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in the God of my salvation. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes me as sure-footed as a deer, able to tread upon the heights. Worship team, you guys can go ahead and come on up. I chose to talk about this today and share these stories with you because this is the message I needed 5 years ago. It's the message I needed last year, and it's a reminder that I need today. In many ways, I have felt like an imposter standing before you here today, because as I've carried this baby for the last 23 weeks, I have been faced over and over with a fear that screams, but what if? And over, I have had to choose to say, even if, instead of what if. And because I'm human, I haven't always chosen that. There have been moments when my fear has jumped in the driver's seat and driven the bus. But what I'm learning is that I don't have to fearfully grasp for control. I can sit back and let God do what he does. I can allow my fists to open and relax, and then I can go ahead and grab the hand of my companion, who's Jesus. Learning to trust in this way has quite possibly been the hardest thing I have ever done and am doing. But what I hear from the parents in the room is that my work of trusting this child to God has only begun. You guys can all stand with me. So my question for you as we get ready to end our time together is, where in your life do you need a companion? Where in your life have you been working really hard to make it work on your own? Because Jesus is here and he's waiting, and he just wants you to relax your fist and grab his hand. And sometimes it takes time, and that's okay. That's okay if it takes time. I find a lot of hope in Psalm 40. And you'll see as we read, all the psalmist had to do was cry out to the Lord and wait patiently. So if you're here this morning and it feels like you will never see the light of day, I'm just inviting you to let these words wash over you. And as you read, I invite you, if you want, to put your hands out in front of you or take on a different posture of receptivity. Once I'm done reading, the worship team will lead us in another song. There will be a prayer team up front. And I just invite you to do whatever you need to do during this last song. If you need to find someone on the prayer team and have them speak an encouragement over you, if you just need to worship quietly in your seat, whatever it is, I just invite you to do that this morning. So just receive as I read Psalm 40. Verses 1-3 say this: I waited patiently for the Lord to help me. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the pit of despair, out of the mud and the mire. He set my feet on solid ground and steadied me as I walked along. He has given me a new song to sing, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see what he has done and be amazed. They will put their trust in the Lord.